The city was already wide-awake glass towers catching the morning sun, streets buzzing with ambition. But somewhere high above it all, in an office where silence cost millions, Damien Cole stood perfectly still. His reflection stared back from a mirror framed in steel and solitude. The world called him a visionary, a tycoon. But some mornings, even he wondered if all he had built had come at too high a price. Push the Winslow deal through today. No more back and forth, he said into his phone, voice like granite. If they stall again, we'll take it without asking. Outside, the black Bentley pulled up to a place that didn't belong in his usual world of contracts and cold strategy, Hazel and Time, a coffee shop barely visible between skyscrapers. He hadn't meant to find it, but now he came every morning. Inside, the world moved slower. Warm light fell across shelves of handmade mugs. A soft song played beneath the hum of conversation. Behind the counter, Clara Bennett moved with the kind of ease that only comes from doing what you love. Her apron was already dusted in flour, her sleeves pushed up, and a faint curl of hair slipped loose from her bun. She wasn't supposed to be here, not in this life. She once belonged to boardrooms and executive suites, but one day she woke up and realized she didn't want to climb a ladder that never stopped, so she stepped off. You look like someone who lost a fight to croissant dough, Mia, her best friend and business partner, teased as she came in from the back. I think the dough won, Clara said with a tired grin. Barely survived round 3. The bell above the door rang at exactly 7:15. Claire didn't look. She didn't have to. Morning, Mr. Cole, she called out, already reaching for his favorite beans. Damien paused. Not because he was surprised she remembered, but because no one else ever did. Double espresso. Oat milk on the side, she said, already working the machine. No sugar. You're not the sugar type. And still no love for the biscotti, she added, sliding him a plate with a smile that didn't ask for anything. He was about to reply he never knew what, but his phone rang again. Deals, deadlines, demands. Those numbers aren't acceptable, he snapped. Tell them he reached for the espresso she had placed in front of him. Their hands brushed, just for a second. But something warm, electric, passed through him, like static before a storm. He blinked, and in that half-second of distraction, his arm caught the cup. It crashed against the counter. Espresso spilled across Clara's apron and down to the floor. The room fell quiet. Damien S. reflexes were all instinct. Watch where you're re-putting things, he barked, but Clara didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She didn't even look angry. She just knelt down slowly, dabbing at the mess with a towel, her voice calm but firm. Spills happen, Mr. Cole. Even to people who like to think they control everything. Even perfection has off days, Clara said gently, wiping the coffee from her apron. Her smile was soft, but her words held steel beneath the surface. For the first time in recent memory, Damien Cole was left without a comeback. He was used to silence, his kind of silence, the one that came from fear, deference, power. But this was different. This was the silence of being seen. I'll make you another, she offered, already turning toward the machine. Don't bother, he muttered, tossing a crisp bill onto the counter without looking. Clara slid it back without hesitation. Your money doesn't mean much here, she said quietly. But a thank you? Or maybe even a sorry that would. Their eyes locked, hers earthy, steady, his glacial, calculating. And yet something unexpected stirred in him. Not annoyance, not embarrassment, but curiosity. And maybe, beneath that, the unfamiliar heat of desire. This isn't over, Damien murmured, mostly to himself, before walking out into the blur of city noise. Clara watched the door swing closed behind him. She had no idea what kind of storm she'd just stepped into. Outside, Damien stood still for a moment on the sidewalk. heart beating too fast for a man who prided himself on control. He pulled out his phone. "Get me everything on a coffee shop called Hazel and Thyme," he told his assistant. "And the woman who works there, Clara Bennett. Make it thorough." 3 days passed. He didn't return. Clara told herself she didn't notice, that she wasn't checking the door every time the bell rang, that she didn't pause each time footsteps approached. "You're doing it again," Mia said, nudging her gently. "Doing what?" Clara asked, wiping the already clean counter for the 5th time, looking for Mr. Tall, moody, and intimidating. Clara laughed it off. "Please. If I wanted emotional frostbite, I'd date a glacier. I'm not here to fix billionaires with bruised egos." The afternoon quiet was settling in, post-lunch, pre-dinner. Clara was elbow-deep in testing a new caramel pastry idea when the front door slammed open hard enough to rattle the light fixtures. Damian Cole stood in the doorway like a thundercloud in a tailored suit. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him streamed a crowd, lawyers, assistants, someone with fabric swatches. "This cafe is now closed for a private meeting," Damian announced to the unsuspecting customers. They blinked, uncertain. But the force in his tone left little room for protest. People began gathering their things. "Excuse me?" Clara strode toward him. "You can just waltz in and I can," he interrupted, sliding a folded document across the counter. "Lease terms," he said calmly. Clause 7, paragraph 3. "The landlord reserves the right to conduct business inspections with 72 hours notice." He tilted his head. "We sent the email 3 days ago." Clara S. breath caught. "Wait, you're the landlord?" "I am the owner," Damian replied, "of this block, including your apartment building on Maple and 10th. Mia appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "What's going on?" Clara S.'s voice was tight. "Apparently, Mr. Cole owns half our lives." Damian gestured, dismissing his entourage. "Wait outside." When the room cleared, the mood shifted. The chill in his voice gave way to something quieter. "I've been thinking about the other day," he began. "Oh, you mean when you yelled at me for your own clumsiness?" Clara crossed her arms. A muscle in Damian's jaw twitched. "I don't yell," he said. "I project." Mia let out an involuntary snort from behind the counter. Damian shot her a look. "Could we have some privacy?" Damian asked, his tone clipped, his meaning clear. Clara didn't but to flinch. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my partner," she replied, nodding toward Mia, who had now crossed her arms, every bit as protective as she was curious. Damian sighed, as if the whole situation was already exhausting him. "Fine." He straightened the cuffs of his suit and met Clara's gaze. "I'm here to make you an offer." Clara's brows rose. "You know my last name?" He ignored the question entirely. "Your calf is functional," he said, glancing around the space like a buyer, inspecting a fixer-upper. "But your pastries are extraordinary. My team ran your numbers." "You did what?" Mia and Clara said in unison, incredulous. "With proper funding and the right partnerships, Hazel and Thyme could be scaled nationally in under 2 years. Clara blinked, struggling to keep up. "You want to franchise my calf?" "Not exactly." He began to pace slowly, hands folded behind his back, like a man preparing to deliver a verdict. "I want to hire you, personally, as my private chef and event caterer. Your creations would be exclusive to Cole Ventures." Mia let out a low whistle. "And how exclusive is exclusive?" He named a figure. Both women stared, stunned into silence. "That's, Clara began. "Life-changing," Mia finished, breathless. Damian reached into his jacket and produced a sleek envelope. 6 months of exclusivity. You to cater every major function, design signature desserts. And one more thing. He hesitated not with hesitation, but calculation. You to teach me how to bake. The words hung there for a beat too long, like flour suspended in sunlight. You want me to teach you? Clara repeated, stunned. He gave a small, awkward shrug, something almost human, breaking through the armor. I've been advised to develop a hobby, something outside of profit margins and quarterly reports. Apparently, it could help with my personality. Soul-crushing personality, Mia offered helpfully. Stern management, he corrected. Deadpan. Clara studied him then, really studied him. Behind the clean lines and tailored perfection, there was something she hadn't expected to find. Loneliness. Maybe even hope. Why me? She asked. There are pastry schools, Michelin-starred chefs. I don't like strangers in my space, he said simply. Then he paused. And you're not afraid of me. That last line landed like a challenge. Her heart betrayed her with a subtle quickening. And if I say no? She asked. His face hardened. The building is up for renovations. Rent hikes would be unavoidable. Clara drew in a sharp breath. That's blackmail. That's the business, he replied, voice cool as glass. You have 24 hours. He turned toward the door, then glanced over his shoulder. And there's an NDA. Whatever happens, it stays between us. When the door closed behind him, silence swallowed the calf. Mia grabbed Clara's arm. You have to do it. That kind of money could change everything. We could finally open the second location. But Clara barely heard her. She stood staring at the envelope on the counter, something stirring beneath her anger, something quieter, curiosity. Who was this man who used power like a weapon, but came asking to learn something as gentle as baking? That night, she couldn't sleep. The contract sat open on her kitchen table like a question she didn't know how to answer. Legal jargon blurred before her eyes. Her heart was louder than her thoughts. Near dawn, she made her choice. She would teach him, not because of the threats, not because of the money, because beneath the ice, she had glimpsed something real. A man who had built an empire, but was still, somehow, empty. Maybe, just maybe, flour and sugar could do what fortune never could. She would teach Damien Cole how to bake. And perhaps, just perhaps, she would teach him something far more essential. The penthouse crowned the top of a glass monolith, soaring above the skyline like it ruled the city. From its towering windows, the world stretched out endlessly, parks, rivers, silver-lit buildings, all gleaming beneath the early evening sun. But Clara barely spared a glance. Her eyes were drawn inward to the space itself, cold, pristine, lifeless. Chrome fixtures, polished glass, marble, without a single blemish. It looks like no one actually lives here, she murmured, trailing her fingertips across the icy countertop. Even the kitchen felt untouched, as if cooking had never once been attempted here. Damien shrugged off his suit jacket and placed it carefully on the back of a bar stool. That's the design. Minimalism. Clara tilted her head. No, that's absence. He raised a brow. She added, softer now, a home should feel like someone's heart lives in it, not just their title. I wasn't aware I hired a decorator. You didn't, T, she replied, beginning to unpack her flour and spices. You hired a baker, and baking, she glanced around the sterile space, requires warmth. She turned to him with a smirk. Speaking of which, I'll need an apron. Without a word, he opened a drawer and pulled out two perfectly folded, brand new aprons, still crisp, still white. My housekeeper stocked everything to your specifications, he said. Clara handed him one. Put it on. He looked at her like she'd just asked him to surrender a merger. You wanted lessons, she said simply. Lesson 1. Protect your clothes. Even billionaires can get flour on their shirts. With a reluctant sigh, he tied the apron around his waist. The gesture, oddly domestic, softened something sharp in his presence. What are we making? He asked, trying to sound disinterested. Cinnamon rolls. He raised an eyebrow. They require patience, precision, and a willingness to get your hands messy. In other words, everything you avoid. I have excellent life skills, he muttered. You run an empire, Clara corrected, but you can to make breakfast. She smiled as she measured the flour, and to her surprise, Damien didn't argue. For the next 2 hours, they worked side by side. He was a surprisingly attentive student, focused, efficient. The same energy he likely gave to boardroom takeovers now poured into measuring, mixing, kneading. Still, his need for control showed itself. You don't need to make it a perfect rectangle, Clara said, laughing as he aligned the dough with a ruler. Baking is part science, part intuition. I prefer precision. Then maybe business is your safe zone, she said gently, sprinkling cinnamon across the surface. Black and white. Numbers and outcomes, baking, lives in the gray. Their hands brushed as she guided him through folding the dough. A spark, subtle but real, passed between them. Damien pulled back first, turning to rinse his hands, too quickly. Why baking? He asked abruptly, like he needed to change the subject. You were top of your class at Wharton. Your RSUM reads like the blueprint of a future CEO. Clara paused, surprised, maybe even a little touched, that he had looked into her past. I was on that path, she said quietly. Junior executive, high-rise office, 14-hour days, power suits. She sifted sugar into a bowl, her movements slowed, but then my father died. Heart attack. He was 52. Damien said nothing, just watched her. His last words to me were, lie, I wish I'd eaten more dessert. A silence fell between them, deep and still. And so you quit, Damien said, not mocking, just trying to understand. To sell cupcakes? No, Claire replied. I quit to live. She looked up, met his eyes. My dad spent his whole life saying someday we'll travel. Someday we'll slow down. Someday we'll enjoy life, but someday never came. So I decided mine had to start now. Damien didn't speak. His face gave nothing away. But for the first time, Clara didn't feel like she was talking to a billionaire. She felt like she was talking to a man who wasn't as sure he'd ever allowed himself to want more than success. There was a shift in his eyes, small, fleeting, but Clara noticed it. Your turn, she said gently, trying to break the quiet. Why does someone like you want to learn how to bake? Damien didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the dough beneath his hands, rolling it carefully, almost obsessively. Then, without looking up, he spoke. My mother used to bake. The words landed softly. Sunday mornings, the whole house smelled like cinnamon and vanilla. She always made too much. The kitchen would be a mess. We loved it. A pause. After she died, everything changed. Clara spun as hands stilled. You were close to her? I was 7. He said it like a fact, like numbers on a spreadsheet. Cancer. His voice was detached, but Clara could feel the echo of the boy behind the man. Sorry, she said softly. It was 28 years ago, he replied quickly, almost dismissively. It's not relevant to this arrangement, but it was. She could see it in the way his shoulders gradually dropped their tension, the way his jaw unclenched as he kneaded the dough. Little by little, the ice was melting. When the timer chimed and Clara opened the oven, a wave of warmth and spice swept through the apartment, cutting through the cold luxury like sunlight on a frozen lake. Now we glaze, she said, spooning the silky frosting into a small bowl. To her surprise, Damien reached out, dipped a finger, and tasted it. It was such an uncharacteristic gesture, impulsive, almost childlike, that Clara stared, momentarily stunned. Too sweet? She asked. He shook his head, a slow smile blooming across his face. Perfect. Not the smirk he wore in boardrooms, not the polite, practiced smile meant for PR. This one was real, unguarded. They sat together at the kitchen island, steam rising gently from their finished rolls. Damien took a bite, closed his eyes, exhaled. "This is not terrible," he said, completely serious. Clara laughed. "Coming from you? I'll frame that on my wall." For a few minutes, there was only silence. Not the kind that divides, but the kind that connects. Then his phone buzzed. Again and again, he glanced at it with a frown. "Problem?" Clara asked. "Nakamura deal. It's unraveling. Investors are pulling back." "What's the issue?" He hesitated, then unexpectedly answered honestly. "They don't trust me. They think I'm, all numbers, no heart." Clara tilted her head. "Maybe they need to see that you are human." He scoffed, but not as sharply as usual. "I'm not in the business of being human. I am in the business of winning." "And how's that working out for your personal life?" she asked, without flinching. Their eyes met across the marble counter. There was a challenge in hers, a spark of truth, and something else in his confusion, curiosity, maybe even the beginning of recognition. "You're not like the others I hire," he said finally, "because I'm not afraid of you." "No," Damien said quietly, "because you actually see me." It was the closest he had come to vulnerability, and just as quickly he pulled back. "We'll continue Friday." He stood. His tone returned to neutral. "I'm hosting a dinner Saturday. I'll need dessert for 12. As Clara packed her supplies, her fingers trembled ever so slightly. Something had shifted, and that terrified her more than anything, because under the sharp lines and corporate armor, Damien Cole might actually be someone worth knowing, and that, she knew, was dangerous. The night of the dinner arrived. Damien S. gatherings were infamous in elite circles, not for warmth or celebration, but for the precision with which they were curated. Each guest a calculated piece on a chessboard. But this evening carried weight. The elusive Nakamura family was attending. Their investment could unlock expansion into Asia, an empire-defining move. Clara arrived 4 hours early, arms full of carefully packed ingredients. She had spent days perfecting a dessert that was both a tribute and a statement, a matcha opera cake. Its delicate green tea buttercream, layered between sheets of almond sponge and dark chocolate ganache. Something elegant, something bold, something that would speak when words fell short. Clara stepped into the kitchen and stopped short. Damien was standing at the marble island, tablet in hand, scrolling through the spreadsheets like it was any other boardroom morning. "This isn't a shareholders' meeting," she said, setting her bags down with a gentle thud. "It's a dinner party." "Same thing," he replied without looking up, "just with better food and more strategic flattery." Clara let out a breath, half exasperation, half amusement. "No wonder the Nakamuras think you were all business." That made him glance up, his eyes narrowing. "I didn't hire you to lecture me on etiquette. Consider it a complimentary service," she said sweetly, pulling out her mixing bowls. "Now, either be helpful or get out of my kitchen." He raised a brow. "I'm fairly certain the deed says otherwise." But he stepped aside, watching in silence as Clara began transforming the sterile kitchen into something alive. She moved like she belonged there. No hesitation, no doubt, just purpose and ease. Soon the air, filled with soft music from the radio and the scent of something warm and nostalgic. Damien wandered back in, drawn by the aroma. "What is that?" "Vanilla bean and almond extract," Clara said, layering sponge cake with precise care. "It's the foundation of the glaze." He watched her for a moment longer. "Smell," she said softly, "is the sense most closely tied to memory." Damien's eyes lingered on the mixture. Then he closed them. "Sunday mornings," he murmured, "with my mother." And just like that, something unspoken passed between them. The invisible walls that always surrounded him seemed to ease just for a breath. Then his phone rang. He answered with sharp efficiency. Cole. The moment shattered like glass. Clara kept working, but she couldn't help noticing the way his shoulders stiffened, how his voice dipped into tension, how he walked the room like a lion too long in a cage. Problem? She asked. It doesn't concern you, he said. She dried her hands on a towel. Try me. Sometimes people outside the room see things more clearly. He did not answer right away. Then, to her surprise, Shrike. He did. The Nakamuras are traditional. They value legacy, emotion, things I'd done to wear on my sleeve. Clara studied him. Then show them the part of you that came to learn how to bake because you missed the way cinnamon used to feel like home. His eyes flicked to hers. In business, vulnerability is weakness. In life, it's connection, she said, voice quiet but firm. And that might be the very thing they were looking for. Their eyes locked again, a silent standoff. His instincts against her intuition. Then, without a word, Damien reached for his tie and began adjusting it. The conversation was over, but not forgotten. I have to get ready. Guests arrive in 90 minutes. Claire returned to her task, carefully smoothing the final layer of buttercream. As voices filled the apartment and wine glasses clinked in the other room, she remained behind the scenes, an artist finishing her canvas while the show went on. Through the cracked door, she could see Damien at the table, polished, commanding. Every word calculated, every smile timed, but something was missing. The Nakamuras listened politely. Hiroshi, the patriarch, nodded with professional interest. His wife, Akiko, smiled with soft restraint. Their daughter, May, seemed unimpressed. Then came dessert. Clara stepped into the room carrying a creation that shimmered like architecture, elegant, balanced, bold. Damien stood as she approached, and for a moment, all conversation fell away. Mr. Cole mentioned matcha is a favorite of your family, Clara said, setting the cake gently on the table. So I created a layered opera, cake green tea, buttercream, dark chocolate ganache, almond sponge. Mr. Nakamura looked genuinely intrigued. You made this yourself, Mr. Cole? Before Damien could speak, Clara answered for him, her voice smooth, her eyes steady. He's been learning. Mr. Cole has actually been learning to bake, Clara said, with a soft smile, her tone casual, almost playful. He is more committed than you might think. Damien shot her a sharp glance, but the damage, or perhaps the blessing, was done. Mrs. Nakamura leaned in, intrigued. A man like you finds time for baking? Damien cleared his throat, caught between discomfort and pride. It's a recent interest. What inspired it? May asked, skeptical, folding her hands neatly on the table. Her tone was polite, but her eyes were searching, testing. The room fell quiet. Clara held her breath. She expected a rehearsed line, something clean, strategic, carefully worded, but Damien didn't reach for strategy. Instead, he looked at Clara, just for a moment. Then he spoke. My mother used to bake, he said. Some of my earliest memories are Sunday mornings in the kitchen. She'd hum while the dough rose. The smell of cinnamon and sugar would fill the whole house. He paused. She passed away when I was 7. There was no embellishment, no emotional dressing, just the truth. And somehow, that truth shifted the energy in the room, like the soft wind before a turning season. Mrs. Nakamura's expression softened, her hands folding more gently now. A son who honors his mother while memory understands legacy. Her husband nodded. Perhaps Cole Ventures values more than just growth charts and forecasts after all. As Clara began to slice the cake and serve each plate with care, she felt it the warmth blooming across the table. Laughter came more easily now. The questions turned to values, to vision. less about profit, more about people. By the time the Nakamuras rose to leave, handshakes had become small bows of respect, and farewells carried the weight of real possibility. After the last door closed behind them, Damien loosened his tie and walked toward the kitchen. He didn't speak for a while. Then, without ceremony, he poured 2 glasses of whiskey and slid one toward Clara. "They're going to invest," he said simply. It wasn't a question. It was a quiet knowing. "Because of your brilliant strategy?" she asked, teasing. He looked at her sideways. "Because of your interference," he said, though without irritation. "And your absurdly elegant cake." "You're welcome," Clara replied, tapping her glass to his with a smile. They stood there for a while, watching the city glitter beyond the glass, wrapped in a silence that didn't need to be filled. Then Clara broke it. "You told them the truth about your mother." Damien stared into his glass, swirling the amber liquid. "Yes," he said finally. "Why?" He looked up at her, and this time he really looked. "Because you reminded me," he said, "that maybe there's more to life than numbers and leverage. That maybe I've been measuring success with the wrong ruler." The space between them tightened not with tension, but with something deeper, unspoken, unnamed. Damien stepped closer, close enough that Clara could see the faint weariness behind his eyes, the cracks in the mask, the warmth he rarely allowed to surface. "You should go," he said softly, but his voice betrayed him. It was a contradiction wrapped in caution. "I should," Clara agreed, but she didn't move. His hand rose slowly, fingers hovering near her cheek. Not touching, not yet. The moment hung in the air, charged and fragile. "This would complicate things," he whispered. "Definitely," she replied, just as quietly. The silence that followed was electric, like the stillness before a storm, or the pause between 2 notes in a song that refuses to end. Then his phone rang. The sound shattered everything. Damien stepped back, and with him, the familiar armor returned. Shoulders squared, expression neutral, distance restored. "It's so late," he said, his voice flat again. "I'll have my driver take you home." Clara gathered her things, the weight of what almost happened pressing in around her. Her mind raced with questions, but none she dared ask. Not yet. In the elevator, she stared at her reflection in the mirrored doors, silently reprimanding herself. He was her employer, a man built from contracts and consequence. Getting close to him was dangerous, unwise, and yet she couldn't stop thinking about the way his voice softened when he spoke of cinnamon, or the way he looked at her just before everything retreated. Something had cracked open that night, and no amount of distance could undo it. 2 weeks passed like a blur. The Nakamura deal was finalized, sending shockwaves of celebration through Cole Ventures. The business world hailed it as a triumph. Damien S. calendar overflowed with interviews, champagne dinners, photo ops, and Clara? She became quietly indispensable, his private chef, his event caterer, the woman behind the desserts, now gracing tables at Manhattan's most exclusive functions. Their baking sessions continued, professional, polished, and carefully distant. But the moment in the kitchen that almost lingered, it hovered in the corners of the penthouse like an unfinished sentence. Neither of them acknowledged it. Neither of them forgot. On a gray Tuesday afternoon, Clara arrived for their scheduled session. Rain whispered against the windows, soft and persistent. She stepped inside and immediately sensed something was off. Damien sat hunched at the marble island, sleeves rolled, tie loosened and hanging like a surrender flag. A tumbler of scotch, half drunk, sat beside his laptop. Shadows clung beneath his eyes, his jaw tense with unspoken battles. "We'll need to reschedule," he muttered without looking up. Clara set her bag down slowly. "What happened? It's irrelevant," he said flatly, fingers still dancing over the keys. She should have turned around. Their agreement didn't cover emotional crises, but something deeper than obligation anchored her there. Without a word, she moved to the kitchen, filled the kettle, pulled out the ingredients. He finally looked up. "What are you doing?" "Making comfort food," she said simply. "When my world starts falling apart, I bake. My world is fine." "Then consider it a celebration," she replied, placing a whisk in his hand. "For minor disasters." To her surprise, he didn't argue. He beat the eggs with startling intensity, like he could take control of the chaos through motion alone. "You can stop now," Clara said, with a grin. "The eggs surrendered 5 minutes ago." He handed her the bowl, exhaling through his nose. "Something amusing? Only that you fight pastry the same way you fight mergers." She paused, her tone softening. "What really happened, Damien?" The use of his name, not Mr. Cole, landed differently. It asked for honesty, not deference, and maybe that was why he answered. "My father, S. in town." The words dropped like stones in still water. "Victor Cole," he added, as if the name needed clarification. "Financial deity, devoted family man, or so the press says." Clara remembered the research she'd skimmed early on. Victor Cole, cold-blooded mogul, charmer, tactician, a man known for sculpting his only son into a mirror image, sharp edges and all. "You two aren't close?" Damien let out a hollow laugh. "We speak twice a year, once on his birthday, once on the anniversary of my mother's death." He stared at the batter as if it might contain answers. "Just business, performance reviews, metrics. I report." "He critiques," Clara blinked. "You run a multi-billion-dollar company, and he still reviews you?" "Nothing is ever enough," Damien said quietly. He hesitated, then added, "He called the Nakamura deal adequate, said a competent CEO could be closed it months ago." Clara felt heat rise in her chest. "That's absurd. You've quadrupled the company as value in 5 years." Damien looked at her, surprised, not by her words, but by the warmth in them. The way her anger wasn't for herself, but for him. For a moment, the armor cracked. "He is hosting a dinner tomorrow night," Damien continued, "to celebrate the deal." A bitter smirk ghosted his lips. "Actually, to remind me of everything I still lack, and to parade his latest girlfriend, whose surprise is about my age." Clara stirred the flour with more force than necessary, trying to keep her own expression neutral. But something had shifted in the room. She wasn't just the baker anymore. And Damien, he wasn't just the client. For the first time, Clara saw not the powerful man who ruled over boardrooms, but the son who had spent his life trying to be enough for someone who never said he was. In that moment, everything about Damien made sense. The perfectionism, the distance, the obsession with control. They weren't traits. They were armor worn by someone who learned too young that vulnerability only led to pain. Clara saw it clearly now, and before she could stop herself, the words slipped out. "Take me." Damien blinked. "Excuse me?" "To the dinner," she clarified, pulse racing. "Take me as your date." He straightened instinctively. "That would breach the terms of our agreement." "Then call it a catering job," Clara said, undeterred. "I'll critique your father as chef, purely professional." A reluctant smile tugged at his lips. "My father would hate you." "Perfect," Clara said, grinning. "There's nothing sweeter than exceeding low expectations." They returned to the kitchen in quiet rhythm, side by side again, creating a humble olive oil cake with rosemary and lemon. Simple, honest, comforting. As the scent filled the apartment, something in Damien softened. The harsh edges dulled, just slightly, beneath the warm fragrance of citrus and spice. "You never asked what we were baking," Clara said after a while. I trust you, Damien replied. The words were so easy, so unguarded, it caught them both off guard. When the cake emerged golden and warm from the oven, they sat at the island, sipping coffee and savoring each bite in peaceful silence. My mom used to say that good food fixes most things, Clara said quietly. Damien looked down at his plate. Does it fix impossible fathers? No, she replied, but it gives you strength to face them. Their eyes met across the countertop. This time, no interruptions, no ringing phones, no sudden distractions, just them. Damien reached out slowly, brushing a smudge of flour from her cheek. His hand didn't fall away. It lingered, became a caress. This is dangerous, he whispered. Very, Clara breathed. But she didn't move away. I'm not good at this, he said, voice barely audible. Whatever this is. Emotions. Connection. Ivy spent my whole life building walls. Ivy noticed. Her smile was tender. Lucky for you, I'm good at breaking things open. Occupational hazard of baking. You can make something wonderful unless you are willing to crack it first. Damien's expression flickered between desire and fear, vulnerability and longing. For a man who had mastered control, this kind of emotional freefall was terrifying. The moment teetered, delicate and real. Then his phone chimed. The ringtone was distinct, his father's. In a breath, everything inside him recoiled. The wall reassembled itself with expert precision. I should prepare for tomorrow, he said, pulling his hand away as though it had never been there. Clara nodded, heart tightening. Relief and disappointment wrestled inside her. Things were getting complicated, too complicated. She needed to remember what this was: a temporary arrangement, a transaction, not something real, a billionaire's whim, not the start of something lasting. She packed up in silence. Then, as she reached for her coat, Damien spoke from across the room, his voice flat but deliberate. About tomorrow. Be ready by 7. Wear something memorable. Clara raised an eyebrow. Is that your roundabout way of asking me to be your date? It's my practical way of making sure I survive an evening with my father. But then he looked at her, really looked, and in his eyes, beneath the calm, beneath the steel, was something raw, something unspoken. I find your presence stabilizing. Coming from Damien Cole, it was as close to a confession as she might ever get. Clara gave a slow nod, trying not to show the way her heart kicked in her chest. 7 o'clock, she said. I'll bring reinforcements. Reinforcements? Damien asked, raising an eyebrow. Clara only smiled, enigmatic and quiet. Trust me, as she left, she knew a line had been crossed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the subtle finality of a door closing behind you. Professional boundaries were dissolving. Emotional walls, so carefully built, were starting to tremble. What had begun as a contract was becoming something else entirely, a fragile excuse to stay close while pretending it wasn't about connection at all. Tomorrow night would change everything. Whether for better or worse, only time would tell. Victor Cole's private dining room at Lyell was cinematic in every sense. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the shimmering lights of Central Park. The room glowed with gold and crystal, a curated theater of power. Victor himself sat at the head of the table, a silver-haired monarch in bespoke tailoring, every inch the man who had sculpted Damien into steel. You are late, he remarked, as Damien and Clara were led to their seats. Then, with a glance that could freeze wine, and you've brought company. Damien, yes. Hand brushed lightly against the small of Clara's back, a gesture so subtle, so rare for him, it felt like a declaration. Father, this is Clara Bennett. Clara, my father Victor Cole. Clara extended her hand without hesitation. Her gaze met Victor S. with warmth that refused to yield to his chill. "A pleasure, Mr. Cole. Your son speaks very highly of you." One of Victor S.'s eyebrows rose, skeptical. "Curious. He rarely speaks of anyone." Clara smiled sweetly. "Then perhaps you don't ask the right questions." A flicker of something surprise, amusement, crossed Victor's face before his expression smoothed back into careful neutrality. Beside him sat Cassandra, all glassy eyes and nervous laughter. Introduced as his companion, she seemed a placeholder more than a partner. As the first course was served, Victor wasted no time. He dissected Damien's recent business decisions with surgical precision. Every sentence wrapped in civility, yet soaked in judgment. A masterclass in weaponized parenting. Damien responded with practiced grace, but Clara noticed the subtle cues: his white-knuckled grip on the glass, the twitch at his jawline. "The Japanese market remains under-leveraged," Victor said smoothly. "The Nakamura deal barely scratches the surface." Clara set her fork down. "Actually, I was there when they made the decision." They specifically cited Damien S.'s respect for tradition as a deciding factor. Victor S.'s eyes narrowed. "You were present at a strategic business negotiation?" "She catered the dinner," Damien explained, voice calm but firm. "Clara's not only a chef. She understands people." "A caterer?" Victor repeated, the word dipped in disdain. "How entrepreneurial." Clara didn't blink. "I prefer to think of it as understanding that business is, at its heart, about human connection, something your son happens to excel at." The tension shifted, barely. Victor didn't respond, but he didn't challenge her again either. Conversation drifted to safer topics: art, the weather in Tokyo, but the undercurrent never left. It was a dance of veiled barbs and unspoken history. Then dessert arrived. An ornate chocolate sculpture, all style, no soul. At the first touch of a fork, it collapsed in a sugary avalanche. Clara calmly reached into her handbag. "I hope you don't mind," she said, placing a small white box on the table. "I brought backup." She opened it to reveal 6 perfectly golden madeleines, simple, honest, humble. "My specialty," she said, "not flashy, but real." Victor stared at them like they were an affront. Cassandra, however, eagerly picked one up and took a bite. "Oh my God," she whispered, eyes wide. "These are insane." Victor hesitated. Then, perhaps out of curiosity or pride, he tried one himself. There was a pause. "Acceptable," he said at last. From Victor Cole, it was practically a standing ovation. As coffee was poured, Victor turned to Damien once more. "The board meets next week. I assume you are prepared to justify your latest initiatives." Victor leaned back in his chair, his voice cool and deliberate. "Let's talk about your decision to walk away from the Brightpath acquisition." Damien stiffened. "I reviewed the numbers. It's a poor strategic fit. Their culture would clash with ours. Integration would bleed value." "Your analysis is flawed," Victor interrupted with a dismissive wave. "Brightpath's technology would grant us dominance in several emerging markets, at the cost of dismantling a company that employs 5,000 people," Damien countered. "It's not worth it." Victor sighed theatrically, shaking his head. "This sentimentality is exactly why I question your fitness to lead. Business is about objectivity, Damien, not emotion." Clara spoke before she could stop herself. "Actually, neuroscience says the opposite." Victor turned slowly toward her, unimpressed. Clara continued, calm and clear. "Research shows that people with damage to the emotional centers of their brain, while still able to process logic, make terrible decisions. Emotion helps us weigh values. It helps us care about consequences." "Fascinating," Victor replied, his voice laced with ice. "Your chef appears to have strong opinions on topics well outside her culinary lane." Damien didn't raise his voice, but his words carried weight. Clara has an MBA from Wharton, top of her class. She understands business better than most executives I know. She just chose to build her life differently. Silence fell. Heavy, uncomfortable. Victor turned back to Clara, regarding her now with sharper curiosity. And why, Miss Bennet, would someone with those credentials choose to waste them? Baking? Clara didn't flinch. Because I measure success differently, she said. By the relationships I build, by the joy I create, by how deeply I can touch someone's day, not just how much revenue I generate. Victor scoffed. The luxury of someone unburdened by real responsibility. Clara looked him squarely in the eye. Like sending your grieving 7-year-old son to boarding school 2 weeks after his Mother C funeral. The words escaped before she could stop them. The room went still. Damien froze, his expression unreadable. Victor's face turned to granite. Even Cassandra, ever unaware, had the sense to look down at her untouched dessert. Victor's voice, when it came, was low and lethal. I think it's time you left, Miss Bennet, Damien rose. We are both leaving. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Even Victor Cole didn't to interrupt. Damien looked his father straight in the eye. For most of my life, I have done everything I could to make you proud. Tonight, I realized I have been chasing something not worth having. He turned to Clara, extending his hand. Shall we? Outside, the sky had opened up. Rain fell in silvery sheets, glimmering in the glow of the city. They stood under the awning, breathless and still. That was... Damien began. Disastrous, Clara offered, suddenly unsure of herself. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said magnificent, he cut in, his voice filled with something like wonder. No one has ever defended me like that. He was being unfair. Damien shook his head, water dripping from his hair. In 30 years, I have never walked out on my father. Clara looked at him, half smiling. How does it feel? He exhaled, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face. Free. They laughed, really laughed for the first time, the kind that lifts something heavy from your chest. The rain didn't matter. The world could have stopped spinning, and neither of them would be noticed. You're getting soaked, Clara said. I don't care. Rain streamed down his face, softening the lines, washing away the weight. He looked younger, lighter, real. In one motion, he pulled her toward him. I'm terminating our contract, he murmured, lips just inches from hers. She raised an eyebrow. Firing me? Liberating us both, he said. No more employer and employee. No more billionaire and baker. Just Damien and Clara. And who are they? She whispered. He paused, eyes searching hers. I don't know yet, he admitted, but I want to find out. I want to figure it out, Damien whispered, with you. Their lips met beneath the pouring rain, as if the sky itself had been waiting for this moment. It washed over them, not just the storm, but the years of masks, the weight of expectation, the fear of being truly seen. It wasn't perfect. They were opposites in too many ways, too headstrong, too scarred, but it was real. And in a world so obsessed with appearances, real was the rarest, most precious thing of all. 1 year later, the reopening of Hazel and Time spilled out onto the sidewalk, drawing a crowd that wrapped around the corner. What had once been a quiet, tucked-away cafe was now something entirely new, yet still entirely itself. The entire ground floor of the building now belonged to the cafe. Floor-to-ceiling glass revealed a warm, thriving world inside. Expanded seating, a modern kitchen gleaming behind open counters, and the scent of cinnamon and cardamom drifting into the street like an open invitation. Behind the counter, Clara moved with quiet command, directing her team with calm focus. Mia worked the register, cracking jokes between transactions and handing out drinks with a signature wink. The front bell chimed. Damien stepped inside, holding a small, carefully wrapped package in his hands. Delivery for the owner, he announced with a straight face. Co-owner, Clara corrected, her eyes lighting up as she rose on tiptoe to kiss him. Remember our agreement. Their partnership, both in business and in love, had shocked more than a few people, especially the boardrooms Damien used to dominate. With little more than a nod, he still ran Cole Ventures, but now profit shared space with purpose, sustainability, humanity. Clara had retained full creative control over Hazel and Time, now a flagship for a new kind of enterprise, community-centered cafes that doubled as training kitchens for underprivileged youth, a place where success meant second chances, a place where sugar and compassion were measured in equal parts. Victor Cole had predicted disaster. The business world whispered of a billionaire SE breakdown. But numbers don't lie. Both ventures were thriving. Open it, Damien said softly, nodding toward the box. Clara untied the ribbon, peeled back the paper. Inside was a delicate ceramic plaque, handcrafted, cream white with soft blue lettering. Life is uncertain. Eat dessert first. She stared at it, tears quietly rising to the surface. Your father's words, Damien said, for the wall. Clara touched the plaque as if it were made of memory, then, without hesitation, hung it beside the register where everyone could see it, where it belonged. What would he think, she asked aloud, voice barely more than a breath, of all this, of us? Damien stepped behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. The calf buzzed softly around them, laughter, clinking cups, the hum of life in motion. He'd say, Damien whispered, I'm the luckiest man alive. To have found someone who taught me that the ingredients for success and happiness are the same. He kissed the top of her head. Authenticity, patience, and above all, love. Outside, the sunlight broke through the clouds, casting a warm glow across the cafe floor. Inside, light danced off glass, faces smiled over warm mugs, and dreams rose like bread in the oven. It was a place built from her heart and his hands, from healing and hope, a place where ambition didn't have to come at the cost of joy. And like any good recipe, it had taken time, trust, and a bit of mess. But in the end, it was beautiful, just like them. To everyone who's joined us on this journey, thank you for listening with open hearts, for allowing these characters to live not just on screen, but within you. This story was to just about cinnamon rolls, business empires, or second chances. It was about the quiet courage to feel, the strength it takes to choose connection over control, and the beauty of building something real in a world that often celebrates the artificial. We hope that, in some small way, the story reminded you that vulnerability isn't a weakness, that love, whether romantic, familial, or self-given, is the most transformative ingredient of all, and that it's never too late to start again. From all of us behind this story, thank you for your time, your presence, and your heart. Until the next story finds you, stay kind, stay real, and don't forget to eat dessert first.